Welcome to Tony at 12. I'm Tony LeBlanc, and today I'm in conversation with Declan Gaudion, coxswain of the Alderney Lifeboat. Declan, good to see you.
Yes, good morning, Tony.
And we're going to have a look at the Alderney Lifeboat. But first of all, a bit of the history about the Rnli, because it's the largest charity that saves lives at sea, and it covers the whole of the British Isles.
Absolutely, and it's been going for nigh on 200 years now. So it was a very sort of visionary chap called Sir William Hillary who decided that there needed to be a bit more of a coordinated approach towards life saving throughout the UK, and set up what is now the Rnli. And what it was, what was really unique at the time was that it was set up with volunteer crews and run by voluntary donations. And thankfully today we're nearly 200 years later, and that ethos still continues. So quite an achievement, I think.
Of course, the early lifeboatmen would have been in boats with oars, so that must have been pretty horrific, I would have thought.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's truly heroic to be going out in some of the conditions they did then, with, as you say, with pulling oars and some sail. But thankfully today we've got very, very sophisticated and modern lifeboats that with the best equipment on. So, but yeah, truly some very, very brave people put to sea in those days, for sure.
Those days, yeah, absolutely. So in 1854, it was granted a royal charter under the patronage of George IV. That must have, sort of sealed the progress of the institution in terms of having that behind them.
Yeah, I mean, I think clearly, I think Sir William was obviously a very well-connected guy, and to get the royals on board was quite an achievement. And today, still, the Queen is the patron of the Rnli, and His Royal Highness the Duke of Kent is the president. So we've a couple of years ago, I'm sure you remember, we had the Duke of Kent pay us a visit. So yeah, having that royal connection, I think, is very important for, well, everyone in the Rnli likes. I'm sure is very proud to be associated with the monarchy in that way, and certainly underlines the importance of the charity throughout the UK.
So it is a charity. It's funded by legacies, donations, and merchandising, plus the Alderney jumble sale. So they have.
Well, I'm glad you.
Go ahead.
I'm glad you picked up on the important bit there, which is the Alderney jumble sale. So being one of the jumble sale luggers on a Saturday morning, I know what they're like. But yeah, you're right, and it's a charity that is funded purely by donations, and incredible effort goes into doing all of that at a local level. We've got a very, very industrious, hard-working team of people who do all the fundraising, and that's from running jumble sales to having teas and cakes around the boathouse in the summer, and quiz nights and all sorts, a whole host of things. And as you know, I mean, Alderney is a very generous community.
Yeah.
And I think we're very proud of the fact that per head of population, we give an incredible amount goes from the island to the Rnli, which is, I think something as a crew we're very proud of, in that the island, clearly values the work that we do and support it in that way.
Declan, it does seem to me that possibly, some people might say, well, shouldn't it be, government funded, bearing in mind all the things you do? But presumably the Rnli up the hierarchy are sort of saying, well, as long as we can raise the funds, we can be independent and run it the way we want to run it.
Absolutely, and I think that's the key, is that by the fact that you are independent, you're not subject to government policy and government reviews and all the budgets and so forth. So whilst and again we go back to the actual starting, the basis of the Rnli being run by volunteers with voluntary donations, and that is not going to change. And I think it's a very successful model. Clearly, it's very challenging because the Rnli is a big organisation with a lot of the expenses of running lifeboats and building new types and training the crews and all that is a very expensive operation every year. But whilst donations continue to come in, Clearly, the Rnli has to work hard on doing that because there's a lot of competition in charities these days. But with all the hard work they do and all of the efforts of dedicated fundraising teams like we have here, thankfully the charity continues to be well funded.
It's based at Poole. That's where the head office is. And looking at Mr. Wikipedia, they report 238 stations and 444 lifeboats. And presumably some of those lifeboats are the inflatables, yeah? Yeah,
I mean, there are several different types of lifeboat. There are a lot more inshore lifeboats, ILBs as we call them, which are clearly not as expensive as the big offshore boats, but there are many of them around the station, and then you have intermediate class lifeboats and then all weather. So and as you say, you've obviously been doing your homework on that. I won't argue with the amount of stations, but it certainly is something like that.
It's a lot though, isn't it?
It is a lot, yeah. And in terms of crew, there are, I think, some 6,000 volunteer crew which support the running of those stations. So, and that's not only people who go to sea in the boats, but obviously in locations where there are carriage launches off of beaches and slipways. To launch a lifeboat can be quite quite an exercise with a number of other people involved in that. So you do need, it's not just the people on the boat. So there's a lot of support behind those teams.
I mean, seeing some of those boats going down those chutes, I think it was in Cornwall, very spectacular.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, it's certainly on my list of things to do before I retire from the Rnli. So I've never had the experience of going down a slipway, but it's certainly something I'm going to do, and I'm going to make sure it's the longest slipway in the Rnli to have a go on. So,
do we know which one that is, Declan?
I think it's one of the Welsh stations, but yeah. So, but I'll have to do a bit of research on that. But certainly one of my ambitions is to do that.
A fringe benefit.
Yes.
Of course. These days, we see a lot of flooding inland in the UK, and the Rnli gets involved with rescuing people, that are sort of in villages that are miles from the sea.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think, some people do question why does the Rnli do that, but I think the overall, purpose of the Rnli is to save lives at sea and obviously end from drowning. So it's been highlighted over the years with some of the conditions that have certainly happened within the UK, with flooding, that there was a requirement for, and it's not a very big team. It's only, I think, about 30 people who were involved in this. So it's not, by any shape or form, they're not on standby all the time, but they are drawn from lifeboat stations who are near these areas, who have clearly got the skills that can be transferred to do, fast water rescue in flooding conditions. So, it is something they do, but not that often. And as I say, it's only a very, very small part of what the Rnli do. The core business is clearly, the round the coasts and also the beaches as well. We mustn't forget, there are
that's right. Yeah.
400 odd lifeguard beaches, which are now covered by Rnli lifeguards. So again, a very, very important thing for saving lives and prevention of people losing their lives.
So with the beaches, I believe the local authorities sometimes make a contribution towards the cost of the actual labour cost, as it were, and the Rnli supplies the kit and everything else that goes with it.
Yes, you're right. I think my understanding of it is that the Rnli are supported by councils would have to provide a safety cover for that, but what the Rnli do is, it's not at a huge cost to the Rnli, but what they do is, put people there who have got the correct training and skills to do it, and obviously manage those on behalf of those councils. But a very important work that they do.
Yeah, very much so. Coming back to Poole and head office, it's got its own college, I believe, and obviously training and education for staff and the public takes place.
Yes, it's a very a great facility that they have got. I mean, when I started with lifeboats many, many years ago now, we used to go to Poole for some training, but there was no dedicated centre there now. But over the last, maybe I think it's most probably 10, 15 years, a proper college facility has been built. So yeah, we get the opportunity to we have to keep our training very current. So there are certain things we have to revise, and go and get checked out and kept current on certain things. So there are courses to attend. And then for people who join us as well, who haven't had some of the experiences, there's a very good course there that they do for basic lifeboating skills, which people will attend. So a great facility, and something that unfortunately we haven't been able to use over the last year or so, but it is now open. So all being well, we'll be able to attend some courses later this year.
I mean, how many people from Alderney would go over on these courses?
Well, everyone on the crew will have attended the basic lifeboating skills course, which is about life raft and your personal protective equipment and how to use all of that kind of stuff. So there is a basic thing, and firefighting is part of that. Then you will go on, and as you go through, get on a crew, there are areas that you will specialize. Some people go into engineering, others will go more into the navigational side. So there are all sorts of courses then that carry on supporting that as you go through. And again, you have to not only get up to speed on it initially, but then you have to go and revalidate that training every so often.
Looking at the stats, and I don't know what the date was when they did this, but they're saying 140,000 lives saved, presumably since the inception, but 600 crew lost. That's scary, isn't it, really?
Yeah, I mean, I'm certainly not up on the numbers saved, but I would have thought it is, something around that. And I mean, you're right, tragically, crews have been lost over the years. I think the most recent one, tragically, was most probably the Penley that we would all remember from the Rnli side in the 80s. But I mean, again, 2 years ago, there was a French lifeboat lost on the west coast of France, and that was only 2 years ago. And we work very closely with our colleagues in France on the Cape lifeboat, and it's a similar operation there in France. So that again, I think underlines there were tragically 3 people lost on a service there, and when the boat capsized, and 4 were rescued by other craft. But again, it just kind of underlines that some of the risks that
big
are
risk
there.
Yeah, very much so. Now, Alderney had a lifeboat, then there was a time when we didn't have a lifeboat, and then of course we got the new one in the 1980s. Does the original one date back into the 1850s, something like that? Or
yeah, well, I did a little bit of homework before I knew you were going to get me on doing this, so only on this date though, that was all.
I know.
I mean, originally we had a boat here in 1874, so the records show, and then that was here for a period of just under 10 years. During that time, and that was when Alderney was, there was a lot of quarrying and all that kind of stuff was going on here. Unfortunately, during that time, there was a real problem crewing it, and that then they closed the station down at that time. And in fact, that boat, which was a rowing boat with, I think it might have had a sail, that then went to St Helier, and it was the first Rnli lifeboat in St Helier. So, and what's pretty kind of neat about it is our lifeboat that we have today, Roy Barker 1, is actually the funding for that was from a Jersey resident. So it's kind of gone full circle in that Jersey had our boat originally, and now we have one that's been funded by a Jersey resident. So
I'm right that the current situation took place in the 1980s, yeah?
That's right. So it was in fact.
Who's behind that?
Well, there was more or less 100-year gap before we had another boat, and with the increase certainly in leisure traffic, moorings were installed in the harbour in the sort of 70s and late 70s. So leisure, the industry started to increase around the islands, which was putting more and more pressure on local boats. Have always fulfilled the role of doing some rescues around Alderney, and also supplemented by the St Peter Port lifeboat in Guernsey, which is only 20 miles away. So they used to do a lot. But there was Steve Shaw and our then president John K. Mowat were very instrumental, and Steve was the deputy harbour master at the time, and then went on to be coxswain. Very instrumental in building the case to the Rnli to have a lifeboat station back in Alderney. So in 1983, they re-established, applied for, they did some presentations on the island, the Rnli, and from that, managed to gauge that there was certainly enough interest and support to crew it, unlike 100 years earlier. And then they decided that they would place a station here, initially on a trial basis, but in 1984, we had our station was actually re-established. So 100 years later, we were re-established and started out with a intermediate class lifeboat. Then we went to all-weather boats, and we now have the all-weather Trent lifeboat.
The thing is, though, that Alderney strategically is in a very important place, isn't it? In terms of, being what, an hour in front of Guernsey. If somebody sort of sent a boat from Guernsey up to Alderney, perhaps a little bit less than an hour, but an hour could count, couldn't it? So
absolutely. I mean, I think when you look at the geography of the island, I mean, in particular, you only have to look out the window and you see all the shipping going up and down the channel. So, in terms of commercial activities, we are only 12 miles away from the, second busiest stretch of water in the world. The first is Malacca Straits, but that is the second busiest, amount of commercial traffic. Over 300 ships a day go past here. So and they're in a very, very confined area due to the routing. So that's an issue. The Channel Islands are very, very popular in terms of leisure traffic, with people coming from the UK and the continent to sail through the area. And then, of course, couple that with our very dynamic tides. We have very, very strong tides around here, the strongest in the world, some of the strongest. And that in itself causes, can make conditions change very, very rapidly and give you very, very severe conditions in, quite, benign wind states. So it does catch people out. So we've got a whole mix in there. And I think, it's certainly very, very apparent that we should have a boat here.
Do you think it's too easy for people to buy a boat and not have any proper training? Should there be, stricter rules?
I think it's certainly, from our perspective, the Rnli, we certainly don't judge on anybody who we go out to. We happily go out and we do not mind one bit. So we never judge anybody. We'll go out there and we'll do the job. Personally, I think it's great still that you can buy a boat and you have the liberty to be able to go out there and the freedom to do that. Generally, people are quite, careful, and if they get a slightly bigger boat that's going further offshore, they certainly make a point of doing the right training courses to make sure that boat is properly equipped. So I think whilst there is, and clearly if you go in the commercial world, you have to be regulated to do that. But at the moment, for leisure, I mean, I think that my vote would certainly be, maintain the status quo as it is.
Okay. Now, you've talked about the boat, the Roy Barker. Can you just tell us a little bit more about the technical side of it? What's its top speed and its range and this sort of thing?
Yeah. Well, the Roy Barker one is a Trent class lifeboat, and as I say, it was actually purchased with a legacy given by Roy Barker, who was a Jersey resident. He gave £6.5 million to the Rnli in his will, and that's been invested. And interestingly enough, now we have Roy Barker 4. So every so often, when enough money comes off of that investment, they build another lifeboat. So we have a Trent here. It's an all-weather lifeboat, so there are no restrictions in terms of the weather that it goes out in. It's 1,800 horsepower, 25 knots. 28 tons in weight, and we have an operational range of 250 miles at full speed. But I mean, if you bring it back, a few hundred revs on that, you have a longer duration. So very, very capable boat. Like all offshore lifeboats, it's fully self-righting and incredibly powerful and strong for its size. So we have operationally, we would crew that with 7. That is our requisite number, although depending if you had a call out and you were on a search and you needed additional people to look, you might take more people than that to, given the conditions, we're okay for extra sort of pairs of eyes and what have you. So yeah, that's the boat, and we are interestingly enough, Trents now are coming towards the end of their operational life. So we are now under a review for our station about having a new class of lifeboat, and that is, being sort of talked about at the moment as to what would be the appropriate type we get here, and that will most probably be in the next 2 or 3 years' time.
Will they strap the Trent, or will they sort of cascade it down for different duties?
No, what they're doing, the decision was taken a few years ago now that Trents will actually be retired. So when you retire a lifeboat, generally they do get sold on to other lifeboat stations. So you'll see them around, Spain, use them, Iceland. There's even other boats get shipped out to New Zealand to support their life-saving operations. So they will go on to have another good life somewhere else. But the Rnli have taken the decision that they will be retired, and then they're really focusing on they're doing a life extension on the seven class lifeboat, which is that is being sort of repurposed for the next 50 years with new engines, new electronics, and the hull stays the same, but it's essentially a new boat. And then also there are the Shannon Class lifeboats, which is new class, which was introduced a few years ago, which are now being rolled out around the UK and Ireland as well.
And the new ones are more powerful.
The sevens are slightly more powerful because that's a slightly larger boat. It's 17 meters as opposed to our 14. But essentially, they are of a similar size, and the things they do are very similar.
We see you go out on the odd occasion, presumably for a bit of training. How often do you do that?
Well, training is most probably the key component for our station. We have to practice the skills that we learn, and you have to keep them current. And I mean, our biggest thing is everyone has to be safe doing the things they do on board. So we get not only the best equipment in terms of boats and everything, but we do get the best training available to all of our crew as well. And as we touched on before, the majority of crews are volunteers. So that in itself is quite a challenge because, you do get people from varying backgrounds, and you can take, fortunately on an island, we have a lot of people who have boating experience, but, certainly I'm aware of, friends I've got in the UK where their crews are drawn from, people who have never had any boating experience. So, as long as you have to train, you have to get to proficient levels, and you have to maintain that. So as a station, we have a weekly training night. So once a week, we have the crew come to the station here, and we will go through bits of kit or training videos or so forth on certain things. And then certainly no less than every 2 weeks, we will go afloat on the boat, because obviously there is a bit more expense involved in running a lifeboat and using the fuel and the oil. So we will go every 2 weeks, and we will actually exercise the boat and run different scenarios on it. And we alternate the crews on that as well. So it is a very, it is a busy training thing, and something we have to keep up very, very regularly.
You do occasionally have to get involved with helicopters as well, don't you?
We do. We try and get one of those exercises once a year, ideally, is something we like to do. But we've unfortunately, with the decline of the Fleet Air Arm, we don't get as many helicopter exercises as we used to years ago. I'm sure you're familiar. We used to have helicopters appearing every other weekend. But yes, we have to exercise with them. And then obviously operationally, we work with, in terms of helicopters, the Coast Guard helicopter, and also the French helicopter service as well. So we do regularly exercise with them.
Do you have problems with the language if it's with the French, or are you
not really, because
when you're
no, I mean it's as you can imagine. I mean, I think English is the international language of communication anyhow.
Sure.
So no, it is never an issue, and it's all obviously very professionally run.
Yeah. How many volunteers have you actually got at the moment?
Well, we have 20 volunteers on the crew, and like I mentioned before, we have 7 would be our requirement for going afloat. Out of that, I mean, clearly, you know, on an island, not everyone is here all the time, not everyone's available. So that is about the right number we need to cover for people going off island, and then also you don't want to have, you know, too many in that the training becomes an issue, and also when you get a call out, you want to be able to give everybody a bit of exposure and experience to doing that. And there's nothing more frustrating if you do all the training and you don't get out and do a shout. So so we work on 20. That kind of works for
about
for
3 to 1 sort of thing.
That's correct. Yeah, and that's how we work. Yeah.
So you've got a very active spreadsheet, have you?
We have. I mean, they're so keen and enthusiastic that there is never an issue with getting volunteers. So so we're always well attended.
Have you got you know, an idea of number of shouts per year, or?
Well, we do statistics every year. I mean, last year was very, very low because it was, you know, a unique COVID period. That we didn't have any, you know, the only boating traffic we had here was from Guernsey. So we had, I think, 9 calls last year. But on average, in a normal situation, we average between 20 and 25 service calls a year. So
one a fortnight.
So yeah, so there. I mean, you do get clearly, you know, it's busier in the summer when you have the leisure traffic coming. So we get, you know, 5,000 or 6,000 visiting boats a year. So that in itself generates some calls. But yeah, so that's our sort of, you know, 20 to 25 is our average yearly shout.
Now, you also have to sort of perform a standby medivac almost these days, don't you?
We do. I mean, we've always provided that service. I mean, we are, I think it's fair to say, the last resort because there are, you know, St John's Ambulance run a boat in Guernsey. Clearly, there are other, again, coming back to the spending of Rnli funds has to be appropriate. It's not about, you know, a
government
service.
No, that's right. Yeah.
We have to be. We are the last resort, but we are always there to do it. And over the years, we've done many vacs, and we've had a few close calls with deliveries with pregnant ladies, but as yet, no one has had to be called Roy Barker. So
right,
Roy in their name. So they've got away with that one. But I think last year we did one, but there are. Again, you know, if there is fog, crosswinds, you know, issues with other transport, we are clearly here to provide the service required.
Finally, fundraising. Does the local fundraising all go to head office, or are you able to retain some of the money, or how does that work?
Understanding of the mechanics of it is that what does happen, it all goes into the Alderney account, if you like. So everything it does end up in the general fund, but it is still known that it comes from Alderney, and you know the general revenues fund the stations anyhow. So I think it's very clear that the amount of money that is raised is very significant, you know, in terms of, as I say, per head of population. So it's very, very generous, and down to all the hard work that all those fundraisers do, and something we're, you know, very, very grateful that they do for us.
And it's not just the Rnli, is it? It's virtually anything of a charitable nature always gets good support here.
Absolutely, as you say, you know, it's not just the Rnli as a charity. I mean, every charity on the island is so well supported. It's a very, very generous community.
Yeah, Declan, it's been really great to talk to you. Thank you so much for sparing me some of your time. Pleased to note that you haven't had a shout.
Fingers crossed. Yeah, that would have been quite. Yeah. Thanks, my pleasure, Tony. Thank you very much for having me on.
That's a pleasure.